Warzone Caesaria, the Mare broken, Part 1. Lord Marcos, Mashes replied evenly. I thought you had returned to Ultramar. Other matters came up, and I felt that my skills were needed elsewhere. Marcos had yet to drop his smile, though Mashes noted that his eye had briefly drifted towards Terra before turning back to him. He also noted that some of the regular guardsmen had moved around behind his entourage, almost fully encircling them. Tread carefully, it may be the last thing we do. And so you end up here, Mashes said. I did not know that the soldiers of Caesaria were battling heretics along with greenskins. Of course, you would be blind to the transgressions that have taken place here. Marcos' smile vanished as he continued. Mashes Velas, you stand accused of conspiracy against the Holy Ordos, of treason against the High Lords of Terra and the Imperium, of harboring unsanctioned witches with intent to transport to Terra, and of heresy against the God Emperor of mankind. Behind him, Mashes could hear Alexis and Nikolai switching the safeties off their hell guns, followed by Terra giving a little gasp. Why would you say something like that? Terra asked. Mashes has only ever tried to help others. Silence, witch! Marcos barked, causing Terra to take a small step back. You are just as guilty as the man who stands before me, but do not think you may speak in his defense. It's okay, Terra, Mashes said. I can handle this. Terra said nothing, stepping back again as she fixed Marcos with a glare. So, you abandon your post and rush into the middle of a war zone just so you can accuse me of treason. I would think that your time in the Inquisition would have taught you patience. You think of this as impatience. Marcos scoffed. What would you have me do? Accuse you in the middle of the Imperial Palace, where the gullible and corrupt would be readily available to defend your case. Gullible? Mashes asked before the realization dawned on him. You still think? Come now, young Mashes, any sane man would realize that the Emperor would never reincarnate as a woman. I tried warning you many times, yet you persisted in bringing an undocumented psyker into the Hall of the High Lords, and then deceived many in passing her off as the Emperor reborn. If there is a more blatant show of heresy, I have not discovered it. You're delusional, Marcos. Mashes countered. You were there when she revealed herself, you saw the visions that she imparted upon the assembly. Any psyker can impart visions on another. Marcos looked towards Angelique. You have traveled with one for so long, perhaps the close proximity to the witch has diluted your perception of what is real and what is not. The eye stands before the mare, though he cannot stop her from being broken. Angelique said, looking down to kick at a small rock near her shoe. I know enough about psychic illusions to know when my mind is being tricked, Marcos, Mashes said. This was something different. This actually felt real compared to any illusion. Regardless, Marcos looked back towards Mashes. Turn over your weapons peacefully, and I can assure you that your eventual execution will be painless. If you are going to accuse me of heresy, why not just shoot me down now? Mashes asked. You outnumber us, you appear to have the guard on your side, shoot us now and be done with it. Ha! Had you not already planted your minion in a position of power, then you would have died much sooner. Marcos' smile returned again. I know that the Empress plans to land in the southern half of the city. I will take you there where you will confess to your crimes, after which you will watch me execute the impostor before I kill you. Mashes stopped for a moment, looking towards the men that currently held him at gunpoint. You are delusional, Marcos, he repeated. Delusional? Marcos started, his anger growing. Delusional? My mind is far clearer than any man's, my soul more pure than the greatest shrine worlds. I am a loyal servant of the Emperor and mankind, and I will not tolerate a traitor like you doubting my authority. Would you please stop? Terra shouted, Mashes taken aback by the sudden burst of anger from the young woman as she stepped towards Marcos. Why are you doing this? Don't you realize that there are thousands of people in danger who need our help? Stay out of this, witch. Marcos replied, his eye narrowing again. No, I won't. All you care about is proving that you're right, you don't actually care about any of the people that are trying to do good in this universe. Terra's hands tightened into fists as she continued. So what if you don't think that Mashes told the truth? Does it really matter now? Tara, it matters a lot more than you think. Mashes started, but Tara would not be stopped. I have tried my best to understand how you people operate, and quite frankly this goes against everything that I've come to learn. Humanity is supposed to be united against the monsters that want to destroy it, but you care for your grudges far beyond what a sane person would. So what if hundreds are killed and forgotten, just so long as I'm right? Is that really how you want to live your life? You're a champion of humanity, you should show those that cannot defend themselves that they are being protected, not that their heroes are at each other's throats. Maybe if you all actually trusted one another for once in your life, maybe you could actually stand a chance at succeeding in something. I said stay out of this. Mash's pistol was in his hand before Marco's strike was finished. Tara crumpled to her knees, her hands flying to her face to cover her now split lip. Marcos drew his own pistol, aiming the weapon directly at Tara's head. Well, Inquisitor Velas? Marcos asked. Are you willing to cooperate now? Let Tara go, and we can solve this like true men. Mashas growled. Starting with me sending your soul to hell where it belongs. I will not give such luxuries to traitors. Marcos pressed the barrel into Tara's scalp, the girl whimpering as metal brushed against her skin. Hand over your weapons, Velas, or I will end this witch's life. I have a clear shot at the traitor, my lord, Nikolai said. I can disarm him before he can get a shot off. I am growing impatient, Velas. Marcos' finger tightened around the trigger of his pistol. Turn over your weapons, or the girl dies. Mashas aimed his bolt pistol directly at Marcos' head. He would get one shot, but the hellfire rounds would make short work of the traitor and would cause him to drop his pistol before he could shoot Tara. It was a risky course of action, but the best possible one to protect the girl from harm. Mashas stopped when he felt a hand on his shoulder. The axe is raised, Angelique said, giving Mashas a small smile. Rise up only when the mare has been broken. Mash's jaw tightened as he looked from Angelique to Tara. The girl still had her back to him, holding as still as possible to avoid drawing more of Marcos' attention. Now would be the perfect time to attack and end it all, and from where she sat Tara would avoid the worst of the fighting. Perhaps. Damn. Alexis, Nikolai, Mashas said after a lengthy pause. Stand down. What? Alexis asked. But my lord dash. Stand down, Mashas repeated. We're outnumbered, and Tara is in the line of fire. Even if we do manage to win, there is a chance she might be hurt in the exchange. Not entirely true, but Mashas was no longer willing to trust luck. Stand down, now. There was another pause, followed by the sound of Nikolai and Alexis switching their safeties back on. Mashas lowered his pistol, to which Marcos smiled. It is good to know that even traitors can realize when they are in the presence of their betters. Sergeant, collect their weapons. One of the stormtroopers stepped forward, taking Mash's pistol and sword as two others removed Alexis and Nikolai's hell guns. Mashas moved to help Tara, but was cut off by two other stormtroopers. The girl stays with me, Marcos said, roughly pulling Tara upon her feet while still keeping his pistol trained on her head. A little assurance that you will not conspire further against me. Mashas, Tara stammered, falling silent again as Marcos rested the bolt pistol against her neck. If you know what's good for you, witch, Marcos hissed. You will remain silent until you are given time to confess. You will burn for this, Marcos. Mashas growled. At this, Marcos merely sneered. Only the heretic can accuse the righteous of wrongdoing. Now come, your judgment awaits. Judith, help bring those autocannons up. Naomi called, turning away from the supply chimera the sisters had been working to load. Will she be needing any help, sister? The sergeant assisting them asked. Anything to further the discussion died as they watched Judith carrying two of the heavy guns as easily as a child would carry a pile of sticks, her heavy flamer still slung over her back. Judith has been blessed by the Empress in many ways, friend. Naomi replied, stepping aside as the sister gently placed the autocannons into the chimera. Yes, the man nodded before regaining his composure. I thank you for your assistance, sister. Moving these supplies would have taken much longer had you and your fellows not been here to assist. Do not thank us, Ruth piped up. This is based on the blessed plan of the Empress chosen student. The Empress student, the man asked, confused. Was she that young woman that kept showing up in those vid clips of Her Majesty? Her name's Tara, Judith added. Sweetest thing, but she seems a bit sheltered. Can't swing a sword to save her life, but she will come around in time. Judith, Naomi started, but the guardsman interrupted. No, it's all right, the man started. It's actually comforting in a way. To know that even though the Empress expects greatness from all of us, she searches for it in the most humble of places, reminds me of the stories my grandfather used to tell me. The pious sister within Naomi had thought of a reply, that the Empress' greatness and power was far beyond that of most mortals. It would be a perfect reflection of all she had been taught as part of the order, but from her experience watching over Tara, perhaps there was more truth to the old stories than the bombastic sermons of the ecclesiarchy. We are finished up here, Sister Naomi, Veronica called, she and Rebecca coming around the left side of the chimera. Good. I suppose we should either move on to the next supply depot or return and reconvene with Lady Tara. Naomi looked towards the sergeant. Is there anything more you require from us? No, my lady. Thank you once more for your help. The sergeant turned back to his men, rattling off a series of orders as Naomi's sisters formed up. Perhaps we should report back to Lady Tara, Ruth started. She would be pleased to know her planning has been successful. I suppose that is the best course of action, Naomi replied. And it would be nice to see the young Inquisitor working as well. You still don't like him, Sister Naomi? Veronica asked as they started back towards the command tent. I admit, he is not the most forthcoming about some issues, but he is not wholly unpleasant. He is not, but the Inquisition has always had their share of secrets and lies that I cannot say I have been fond of over the course of my life. A pause. Still, Lady Tara trusts him, and I trust her judgment in this regard. Do you think she trusts that Valhallan that's always looking at her? Judith asked, causing Naomi to grimace beneath her helmet. By the Empress, I hope not. The last thing I want to think about is that man lusting after the chosen student. What if it was the Inquisitor? I suppose I would have reasonable grounds to charge him with heresy. This drew a short chuckle from Judith and Rebecca, but to Naomi's pleasure they did not press on the matter. Sisters of battle were forbidden to have any love beyond the love for the Empress. Why in her name would they think they could obsess over the love between others? Sister Naomi, is that Inquisitor Marcos? Veronica asked, stopping and pointing towards the south. The Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus was easy to spot. His red armor and robes stood out against the olive drab of the guardsmen. He appeared to be speaking with an officer, perhaps that major the guardsmen had spoken to, and the stormtroopers around them had. Lady Tara! Naomi gasped. He has Lady Tara at gunpoint. Confusion switched quickly to rage. Double time, sisters! We must defend the Empress chosen. It was no surprise that Ruth pulled ahead of the others, but the rest of the sisters managed to keep good pace as they charged towards the Inquisitor. The man did not see then, instead calmly stepping into the back of one of two nearby chimeras, the hatch closing shut as the vehicles began to pull away from the camp. With a growl, Ruth raised her bolter to her shoulder, her finger twitching to let off a 3-shot burst. The shells sparked against the armor of the chimera, leaving noticeable scars along the metal while the guardsmen in the camp ducked away to avoid crossfire. Ruth! Hold your fire! Naomi called. But that bastard kidnapped Lady Tara! Ruth protested. And how is firing your bolter into the air supposed to solve things? Assess the situation first, then we can act properly. Ruth hesitated, her bolter trembling in her hands as Naomi turned back to the rest of the camp. Most of the guardsmen were content to avoid aggravating the sisters further, though the officer that Lord Marcos had been speaking to did not appear to be among them. The man was a short, stuffy type, appearing far too clean to be a typical frontline guardsman. What's going on here? He asked. Who are you, and why are you firing weapons inside my camp? I am Sister Naomi of the Order of our Martyred Lady, Naomi began. Our charge, the Empress' personal student, appears to have been taken from us by a rogue Inquisitor. I request that you release a vehicle to me and my sisters that we may try and rescue the lady. I cannot just release vehicles to anyone who requests access, even if they are sororitas such as yourself. Naomi furrowed her brow at this as the man continued. Besides, the matter has already been taken care of, and the rogue inquisitor will no longer be a threat to anyone. No longer. Ruth repeated as she came up next to Naomi. He has stolen the Empress chosen student, and you think that he is no longer a threat? Of course. Lord Inquisitor Marcos explained it all to me. You should be thankful that the traitors have been dealt with before they could dash. The officer never finished before Ruth broke his jaw with the back of her bolter. Traitor! She screamed, leaping on top of the man before driving her fist into his face. You would dare call the Empress student a traitor? She has done far more for the Imperium that you could possibly imagine, coward. Turncoat. Heretic. Veronica and Rebecca darted forward to pry Ruth off the officer before she beat him to death, while Judith unslung her heavy flamer as some of the guardsmen renewed their courage and stepped forward to restrain the sisters. Ruth, that's enough. Naomi pried Ruth off the bleeding man, standing her up before giving her a quick slap. The man is a traitor, but beating him to death does not get us any closer to freeing Lady Tara. Calm your mind and focus your rage instead of letting it run wild like some heretic berserker. But he. Did you not hear what I just said? By the Empress, do I need to get your hearing checked too? Ruth said nothing, though she appeared to be calming down as Naomi continued. We will find Lady Tara, sister, even if we have to pursue her on foot. But I need you focused on your duty, and not drowning the world with righteous zeal, not yet. I'll try. Ruth gave a weak nod. Naomi would have said more, but it appeared that the confrontation had attracted more attention, this time in the form of a taller officer in a blue greatcoat. What's going on? He asked. Pardon, sister, but why does my major look like he was hit by a Lehman Russ? I suppose you are the commander of this division? Naomi asked. Well, yes, the man replied. But that does not really answer my question. You should know that your man here turned over the Empress student to a rogue inquisitor, who believes that she and her fellows are traitors of the highest order. The officer seemed to grow pale at this, stepping back slightly as he regarded the injured man. Is this true? He asked. The major could not speak for himself, but some of the other soldiers gave quick nods of affirmation. The officer's worry quickly shifted towards anger. Damn it, I spend a goodly fortune proving that this isn't some hoax, and this is how you repay me. I'd haul you to the commissars myself if matters were not so urgent right now. I am certain you will handle his punishment properly, but my sisters and I need to catch up with the traitor before he can bring further harm to the student and her companions. There was a pause as the officer's expression shifted again. I can provide you a transport of some kind, he started. But I cannot spare men for a full rescue mission. The Greenskins have started a major assault from the north and south, and we must redeploy to make sure that the aliens are contained. You'll have to save her on your own. We have faced more challenging missions, Naomi replied. Do what you can, and may the Empress guide your path. The officer nodded, turning back towards the command tent while two other guardsmen helped the injured major back to his feet. Naomi turned back to her sisters before speaking. They could not have gotten very far, she said. We should be able to catch Marcos before the orc attack can possibly reach their position. The sisters nodded, though Ruth's scowl had returned once more. Is there something that you wish to say, Ruth? Nothing more, Sister Naomi, she started. Perhaps I acted a bit rashly, but understand that I would die before I would see Lady Tara injured. I'm sure we all would, Ruth. Naomi replied. I'm sure we would. Twilight's lip ached, but otherwise had stopped bleeding. Not that it gave her much comfort, with her hands chained behind her back while she remained surrounded by Marcos and his men. Mashes and the others had been put in another vehicle, and she remained uncertain if they were still even following Marcos' group at this point. As if to add insult to injury, Marcos had taken Twilight's sword, the weapon dangling from his waist as if to taunt Twilight as to how hopeless she was. Once more, Twilight was cut off and alone. You don't have to do this, she mumbled, speaking only to cut the silence within the vehicle. What does it take to get you to stay quiet? Marcos asked. I should have had you gagged before bringing you here, at least it would keep you from trying to sway me from my righteous cause. Creating division among people is righteous? If you would only speak to the Empress about your concerns. Your Empress is a liar who has deceived far too many, but the Imperium will be saved from Masha's delusions. Marcos looked towards Twilight. This is not the first time some heretic has come forth claiming to be the Emperor reborn. The last one I believe was killed by the Inquisition sometime in the 41st millennium, though with the Emperor's ascension shortly thereafter I imagine that some data may have been lost. Marcos was using circular logic again. Twilight might not have been able to fight him physically, but she could at least attack him from there. So you think that a massive conspiracy to deceive thousands through simple lying and manipulation, without anyone else letting slip that it's fake, and somehow managed to bring some of your greatest heroes under its influence, is more believable than the idea that she really is the Emperor. Psychers are well known for their ability to control minds. I am sure they would have found a way. And, wouldn't some others have figured it out as well? Twilight raised an eyebrow. Maybe someone who wanted the Empress dead tricked you into thinking she was not who she said she was, and now you're putting your god's life at risk because of some other being's desires. Marcos did not hit her again, but it was clear he wanted to. You are trying my patience, witch, he growled. Doubt my purity again, and I will leave your corpse to rot by the side of the road. Twilight said nothing, but she could feel the vehicle decelerating, the squealing of treads against concrete filling the interior. Maybe they took Marcos' threat literally, the small, more irrational part of Twilight's brain thought. My lord, the road has been blocked, a voice chimed. What do you mean, the road has been blocked? Marcos demanded. This was marked as a main supply route. It appears that some of the buildings have been damaged during the fighting, the rubble is too much even for the dozer blades to handle. Twilight watched as Marcos' frustration grew further. Muttering to himself, the Inquisitor stepped onto a nearby bench and opened the top hatch, looking out at what Twilight assumed was the obstruction. With Marcos distracted, Twilight began to twist her hands around in her restraints. It was a technique Pinky had taught her about for slipping out of hoof cuffs, part of a failed escape artist trick she had tried for one of her parties, according to her, and hopefully the same basic principle applied across species and dimensions. She even summoned a small bit of her power to strengthen and protect her hands as the metal dug against her skin. The Inquisitor did not go lightly on the restraints, but ever so slightly Twilight could feel them begin to give way the more she struggled. The soldiers in the vehicle did not appear to notice, still facing forward even as Marcos continued dealing with the obstruction. He would not be distracted for much longer as he finished directing his troops, but the work Twilight had done would be enough that she could continue to struggle and eventually break free before the man brought her to Celestia. Escaping him would need some more work. Twilight continued with her struggle, but was momentarily distracted by the sound of engines overhead. These did not sound like the engines of Imperial or Tau craft she had encountered. If anything, they sounded a few magnitudes louder. Though, with the way that sound tended to carry when an object drew closer. Twilight had no more time to think on the matter before the vehicle shook violently, Twilight yelping as she was tossed about in her seat. Her restraints did loosen, but they would leave some significant bruises along her wrists once she broke free. Incoming! Twilight had only enough time to duck before the vehicle shook again, followed by several massive holes punching through the side armor of the vehicle. Twilight, Marcos, and a few others were able to dodge the shrapnel, but the man seated next to Twilight could only jerk about as a large round punched through his armor, chest, and eventually back. She fought back the urge to gag as blood washed down the dead man's chest, collecting in a small puddle around his boots. This was what war was like in the Imperium. Fighting changelings did not lead to such dismemberment. Damned greenskins! Marcos bellowed. They cannot understand what they are costing me. Driver, get us out of here now. Panic overtook reason, and Twilight flushed her power into her wrists. There was a pop as the restraints burst apart, Twilight not even bothering to check her wrists as she sprinted towards the rear hatch. Another burst of her magic tore the door from its hinges, Twilight sprinting out into the street heedless of the warnings from her captors. The street was filled with chaos. Besides the two vehicles Marcos had led, there were a number of small installations dotting the side of the road, quad-barreled guns blazing. Overhead, a flight of crude, red-painted aircraft swooped down on the humans below, smoke pouring out of every possible pipe and hatch as they strafed the plaza. Twilight ducked again as chunks of rock the size of her forearm were blasted from the pavement, some of the shells catching humans as they ducked for cover and tearing through them like they were wet paper. Twilight started running as one stricken aircraft corkscrewed out of the sky, spiraling down until it slammed into the ground next to the second vehicle. The tank lifted up from the explosion, tumbling back several yards before coming to a rest in a mangled heap. Mashes! Twilight screamed, stumbling forward a few steps towards the wreck. He could escape, he and his men were trained in this sort of thing, they would be able to get out and get to cover. Twilight would not be left alone. A gunshot rang out, the shell exploding next to Twilight. She whipped around to see Marcos and a few of his men, the Inquisitor leveling his pistol at her. "Stop, witch!" he bellowed, firing another round that Twilight barely dodged. Panic took over once more, and she found herself scrambling around rubble and other refuse in her effort to escape the Inquisitor and his men. The street beyond was no more clear than the rubble, the road was littered with the wrecks of tanks, transports, and aircraft, some still burning from being shot down. Spent casings and broken weapons were scattered about, making every step Twilight took a test in trip avoidance as she ran. Burned and bloodied bodies piled up around wrecked vehicles, some still recognizably human or alien while others were nothing more than shredded, blackened piles of bone and ash. Beyond that, Twilight could see the road terminating in a shattered wall, stretching out into a vast plain marked by small columns of smoke. Ahead, Twilight saw one tank that did not appear as damaged as the others. Aside from the large hole in its turret, it appeared almost perfectly intact. Stumbling slightly, she scrambled up the side of the tank, tossing open one of the nearby latches before crawling inside. The space was cramped, smelled of oil, and Twilight did not want to know what the other shapes within were, but it was shelter. She curled up as tightly as she could, keeping the latch slightly open so she could keep an eye out for anyone that might approach. Hopefully, Marcos would continue on, and she would be able to escape. To where? Mashes was dead, Celestia was still in orbit, Corax was gone, Naomi and her sisters were still back at the camp, and here she was, lost in a vast city with nowhere to run. A tear welled up in Twilight's eye, but she fought back the urge to cry. Crying would only draw attention to her hiding spot, and that would mean death for her. And she had gotten through difficult times before. She could get through this, she had to get through this. Damn it! Twilight gave a small jump as she peeked out. Marcos and his men had stopped not too far from her, the soldiers sweeping their guns about as they searched. The witch escaped. Had you not wasted so much time trying to scale that rubble, we could have captured her by now. Apologies, my lord, one of the soldiers nearby said. She will not escape us again. I will have your head if she does, Marcos growled. Search the area. She cannot have gotten far. With that the soldiers spread out, keeping their guns at the ready for any sign of trouble. Twilight crouched down, doing her best to stay out of sight and keep her breathing controlled as the men drew close. There was a pause, Twilight closing her eyes as the soldier reached to open the hatch. Before he could, though, there was a torrent of gunfire from outside, followed by a mess of indiscriminate shouting. This was drowned out by a bellowing roar of Waak, and Twilight ventured a peek outside. Marcos and his soldiers had pulled away from their search as a band of about 30 orcs came barreling towards them. They were just as Masha's notes had described them, big, green, armed with a variety of rusty axes, cleavers, machetes, and guns. The biggest one was armed with a massive chainsaw hazardly bolted to a long piece of pipe, and as its fellows tore through the soldiers it made a beeline straight for Marcos, roaring as it drew back with its weapon. You will not defy me, Xenos filth! Marcos yelled, raising his pistol as he drew Twilight's sword from his belt. The greenskin was not slowed in the slightest, sweeping his weapon in an upward arc towards Marcos' torso. The strike was enough to lift the Inquisitor off his feet, his gun and Twilight's sword dropping to the ground as they were knocked from his hands. At first, Marcos' armor held, the whirring chainsaw only created a cascade of sparks as it scraped along the metal. But soon metal gave way, a cloud of red splattering the orc before Marcos was flung aside, landing on the ground in a heap. The beast stepped forward, stopping only to stomp on the sword, before bringing his weapon up and driving it into Marco's back, the Inquisitor flailing for a bit before falling still. Chuckling, the orc reached down and grabbed Marco's head, giving a sharp twist to rip it from what remained of the man's torso. Twilight sank down into the ruined tank as the alien raised the head in triumph, his fellows bellowing with him as he impaled it on a shoulder spike. They roared several more times before charging off down the road, leaving Twilight alone with the sound of distant gunfire. Now, alone and surrounded by death, Twilight wept.